Does your legacy have to be singular and specific, or can it be broad with multiple facets? I'd like to welcome Jake Stahl to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday morning. Welcome, Jake.
Angelina, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for the honor of having me.
It is my pleasure. So, would you share a little bit about your background, professionally, personally, etc., to start us out this morning? I know you've trained in 6 different countries.
Yeah, and 10,000 people. I've spoken in 47 different states. So my background is all about training and development and helping people get better, specifically at communicating. So I work with CEOs on how to run town hall meetings and how to approach their VCs. And I work with sales reps on how to make a better impression and get rid of all the fluff that makes them get the label sales rep.
Yeah, yeah. So I know one of the things that you talk about is being a fractional chief learning officer. Would you share a little bit about what is this? Why is it valuable? And what does it mean in today's gig economy?
Sure. So, as you're probably aware, fractional is the latest wave. It speaks to somebody who takes over a spot of high authority, usually a VP or a C suite member, and they do it for a short period of time, usually 32 hours a month or so. And it's usually a limited gig, maybe 6 months. And we act in that capacity. So, a chief learning officer is a fancy name for a head of training and development. So, I will help a company build and establish a training department, help them with their onboarding of their sales reps and employees, and I help them create all the collateral, learning management systems, etc. And we'll make sure it's all in place before I walk away and they install somebody permanent.
Yes, yes. I know you've talked about that you'll work yourself out of a job.
Yes. Yep. That's
Yeah,
my job is to not have a job.
yes, yes. So before we dive into the legacy bit, I thought we would chat about what it is that you see out on the landscape. And sometimes I'd like to start with the problem and then we maneuver to the remedy and kind of what you've learned from A to Z over the years. So what do you think the biggest problem is when you look out there regarding sales, training and development, conversation, communication, all of that area?
Sure. So, in my opinion, when it comes to training in specific, and this ties into communication very well, but we're getting into a problem with things like AI and mass producing training programs. So, we've gotten to the stage where we no longer teach somebody, check for retention, create proficiency, create repeatability. We're getting into an area where we mass produce training programs. We give people a multiple choice at the end. And if they do half decent, we give them a certificate. And then they post it on their LinkedIn profile and they're considered trained. I think it's getting to be a dangerous trend. And I don't think AI is making it much better because it allows, the mass production of training programs, communication workshops, etc., without having that need to establish proficiency and maybe not even use proper instructional design techniques. And I want to be clear, Angelina, I'm not making a broad sweeping statement that it's all bad. I'm just saying this is the shift that I'm seeing, that for those of us who did training old school, where we went through every step and we made sure they were proficient, um, it's hard to watch. An
Yeah.
example is, you look at a good quarterback today, like Patrick Mahomes. Patrick didn't learn how to do this on a multiple choice test, and he didn't learn how to do it online. It was learn it, check for retention, check for proficiency. Is it repeatable? Is it sustainable? And a lot of the coursework nowadays, Angeline, isn't doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I caught that in some prior podcasts in my due diligence for this morning. I caught that you had talked about that you were trained in terms of a script, but you also know how to leave the script behind and veer away from even asking a prospect, how are you? Like you avoid that question of how are you because you know that a lot of the times we as a society today, we're preconditioned to just say, oh, I'm fine, Jake and but not really dig deep. And so it begins a business relationship on a superficial level of, well, you don't really care about me. And so I think the
Right.
point you made is, can somebody trust themselves enough in those principles and in those fundamentals to know the product and service well enough to be able to just dance with that prospect and that customer in the moment And I think this is that valuable part, but that kind of comes from that 10,000 hours of being in the field.
It does. And in all honesty, Angelina, we talked about the proficiency and the reproducibility and sustainability. And I'll give you a quick example. I teach this all the time. Don't give conditional responses. Listen to somebody, give them the basic response. I was at an appointment just yesterday and I'm going on vacation next week. And I left. I said, thank you for everything. I appreciate your time. And they said, have a great vacation. And before I knew it, I said, you too. And it's like, this is what you tell people not to do. So, yes, it's these preconditioned responses get to dominate our lives to the point where we don't actually listen to what's being said. And I'm just as guilty as anybody.
Well, I think it's interesting because you have an awareness around that preconditioning, where I think it takes a huge amount of authenticity to be able to be self-reflective. Not everybody wants to look at themselves.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm often asked, do I consider myself a good communicator? And the reality is no. I just think I'm more aware of mistakes I make, and I make a more concerted effort to correct them. So I'm not any better or any worse than anyone. I'm probably just more aware.
Yes, yes. So one of the things you've talked about is the art of conversation. And I thought, that's really cool because you realize that, again, to dance in the moment means that you build a better connection with the person across from you. And again, we miss that. Like you had said, somebody can go into the grocery store or they're running their errands, or even if they're building a company, whether that's a startup today or it's a company that has, let's say, a legacy background that they've been around for many decades and so forth, maybe even centuries. So in that art of conversation, you mentioned the 210 rule. Say more.
Yeah, the 210 rule was something I've developed over the past probably 15 or 20 years of doing communication skills with representatives. And it's based on a simple fact that for every 10 minutes you talk or present, you generate about 2 minutes worth of questions in the other person's head. So when you think that, Angelina, that's a huge statement. So if they listen while I'm talking, I'm automatically generating questions in their head at the tune of 2 minutes for every 10 minutes. So my theory was if I flip that on its head and I say every 2 minutes, I check in with the person I'm selling to, presenting to, speaking with, whether I repeat back a statement or ask them a question, anything to interrupt the rhythm and check in for understanding is going to be a real plus for me. And then at the end of 10 minutes, I do kind of a summary. Maybe, Angelina, we've been talking about 10 minutes now, and I realize we've talked about a lot. Is there anything that was unclear? Did I skip by something that maybe you didn't understand? So if I do this, Angelina, consistently, 2 and 10, 2 and 10, 2 and 10, imagine the increase in awareness, the decrease in miscommunications, and the ability to really connect with the other person. So all I did was wrap police tape around time limits and every 10 minutes. And this is a public speaker or a salesperson or somebody presenting in a town hall meeting. It works fluidly across all those places.
It does, but I think it takes a certain amount of discipline to care enough to do it and to check
It's
in.
That's correct. And it's funny, a person showed me something they bought on Amazon who was a client of mine. And it was like a little block, and you could set multiple timers on it. So on one side, he had 2 minutes set for it to go off every 2 minutes. Then on another side, he had it set to go off every 10 minutes. And he used that until he got the 210 rolled down. And he said it was invaluable. So to your point, some people really need that visual or that stopwatch to make this effective for them.
Yes. Do you have any success stories out of curiosity?
Yeah. So I had a representative that I worked with for a very large company. He had been selling with them for about 11 years. And when I talked to the VP of sales, the VP of sales said, I want him fired. Do what you need to do to get rid of him. And I said, let me work with him a little bit. And this rep was super intelligent and knew his products and competitors inside and out. And when I stopped him from verbally downloading everything he knew and not checking in with a customer, within 6 months, I had top 25% of the company and number one in his region. And then the next year, we had him in the top 5% of the company. But it was a gradual progression. And it was a real learning curve because he was in his 40s. This was hard to shift the way he did things, but the results were amazing. And he's still in the top 5 in that company today.
Awesome. So I guess the point is, if your company is struggling, consider the 210 rule as a way to increase sales and revenue and communications.
Yeah, it's just one of many facets of what I teach when it comes to communication skills.
Yes. One of the other strategies is cadence over content in a conversation.
Yeah, so the cadence really ties in with the 210 rule quite a bit because when you're interrupting every 2 minutes and you're looking for an interaction and then you're stopping every 10 minutes just to sum it up, you're establishing a cadence. But the other piece of that puzzle, Angelina, is we need to understand when we communicate that until we form a trust or a bond, what we're talking about is not going to take effect. So, one thing I always coach my clients to do is when you first communicate with somebody, whether it's email or verbal, don't talk about yourself at all for a minimum of 2 minutes. And if you need to set a stopwatch, do it. But make sure you just keep asking about the other person because until I get that cadence of the smooth back and forth and you trusting me, the content just doesn't matter because they're not going to be involved. They're not going to be listening or bought in.
Oh, that's so interesting. That reminds me of some of the content that Dale Carnegie teaches, as well as I think you made a point regarding even children when they talk.
Yeah. Yeah, the children do this naturally. Look at 2 5-year-olds. It's hysterical. That's my mom. Which one is yours? I like trucks. Do you like trucks? My color's black. What's your favorite color? We're natural conversationalists when we're kids to the point where if I chattered back and forth with you for 30 seconds, I run to my mom, hey, that's my new best friend, Angelina. We're going to spend a lot of time together. Somewhere along the line, we lose that. Most of us lose it. And it just takes a little bit of effort to get back to it. It's like riding a bike. You just need to relearn it, and then it just comes easy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you talked before about breaking the conditioning, I think that uh it's a courageous thing that needs to be done and people are better for it. But you have, gosh, millions of college graduates right now that probably need to learn this. And if they don't have a good set of skills around communications and sales and I mean all of this, they could find themselves struggling in today's gig economy because a lot of it is coming down to interpersonal skills. When you had mentioned artificial intelligence before, AI can take over a number of jobs. So what is needed for humanity and humans? It's the interpersonal skills.
Yeah, and it's the verbiage, right? Because AI can write you an email and AI can crank out 1,000 emails a week. But if that email doesn't touch on basic human skills or basic human empathy, it's not going to have the same impact. I just worked with a client recently, sends out 1,000 emails per week. And all we did was modify his message. We used neuro-linguistic programming. We recreated his message and we increased the click rate by 15%. So AI and marketing automation can be just a garbage message sent out a million times. Why not make sure that message, that interpersonal skill of writing is effective and is apparent in every email you send?
Yeah, yeah. I probably get 15 emails in my inbox every day, and I go, I don't know who you are, and they're selling
Yeah,
me, and then I start
right.
to read it, and like I think you made a joke one time on a prior podcast that somebody made an assumption about you that wasn't true, and it kind of just made you laugh because they didn't do their homework. And I get emails
Yeah.
sometimes from individuals, and I'm like, wow, they have no idea that what I do or who I am, and it's like, wow, that was the fastest, delete.
Yeah. Yep. I just got one this morning from a company that does lab testing, lab diagnostic testing. And the person's like, we have 120 labs that are doing our testing. We'd like to do your lab test for you. What?
Yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but it
Yeah.
came into my DM box in LinkedIn like it was guided directly towards me.
Yeah.
If that's their marketing campaign, it's going to be tough to get clicks.
Yeah, I think that's why I think it's important for you to bring up what you know, because there are people that are searching to get their marketing and their sales right. And where do they start? Who do they turn to today as an expert, or who do they turn to today that actually knows the principles and the fundamentals? I know there's a lot of courses out there, and I know that you offer some courses, but sometimes,
Hmm.
like you had said, it also requires a little bit of hand holding. You can't just, learn everything just from like a recipe. Sometimes you have to get into the kitchen and show somebody,
Yeah.
because the devil's in the
Yeah.
details.
If I can give a takeaway for your audience, Angelina, here's something that I've found works great is your first several reach outs do not talk about you or your business. My first 3 or 4 DM and email reach outs have nothing to do with me or what I do or selling. It's asking them questions about themselves and their business. But Angelina, a miracle happens usually between the third and fourth reach out. That person writes back to me and says, I've talked a lot about me at this point. What exactly do you do? Ah, now you're open to my message. I would say that probably 80% of people I reach out to in this way eventually want to set up a meeting.
And,
And that's pretty unheard of.
and do you think that's because, and I think you've shared this on prior podcasts, that the most important thing is somebody's name to them? So thus, if they're sharing about what it is that they're facing, that then is the most important thing regarding them feeling heard.
Yeah. And what's our favorite topic? Universally, what's our favorite topic? Us. Right, exactly. I want to talk about me. So if I can get them talking about themselves and feeling good about talking to me, and I'm being very sincere, I don't want this to sound like I'm this, person that has this insincere reach out, but I'm very sincere. And by the time they get to the point where they've talked themselves out, they're more than willing to hear what I have to say. And we've established a bond. It's a long game, but boy, that long game pays off in spades.
Sure, and building the relationship. So it's more than a
Yeah,
transaction, which I think is really important today. People talk a lot about that. You got to build the relationship. And that does, it takes a little bit of time. It doesn't happen
it
on the first
does.
phone call. And I think that's the part that people forget, because it's so transactional, even if it's not necessarily like a high value item, but that relationship still needs to be there. What else works well when it comes to development with people?
Well, I think there's a couple of things you can look at. The first is people start people start trying to persuade when they talk to them. But I'm going to use a term I did not coin. It was coined by a very preeminent social psychologist. But what are people doing with persuasion? So, what are you doing before you talk to somebody that's making an impact? And one of the things psychologists have said was your picture can go a long way to developing trust before you even talk to that person. And there's 3 things in a picture that will do it for you. First is a big smile. Second is leaning forward just a little bit, nothing obvious, but just a little bit. Last is tilt to the head, slight tilt to the head. And
But
the reason they say that's the case, you were going to ask that, weren't you?
yeah,
Yeah, the reason they say that's the case is they feel there is kind of a psychological instinct to that you're slightly exposing your jugular, meaning you trust them as well. So tilt of the head, big smile, slightly leaning forward can start to persuade anybody looking at your LinkedIn, your Zoom profile, your Facebook ahead of time.
interesting, interesting.
It
I know.
is cool.
Yeah, I know that one of the other things you mentioned had to do around reciprocity. When
Yep.
somebody shares, so sometimes when women are nervous, they get chatty, they chat too much, and that's a primal thing. But I've noticed that there are times when if I'm too chatty and too vulnerable, it causes the other person then to become vulnerable, and they start sharing things. And I just realized after listening to you, oh, that's why they do it, because I went
Yeah.
first, even if it was not necessarily conscious or intentional.
Yeah. And reciprocity works out in a couple of other big ways, Angelina. So the first is an apology. If you ever start a conversation with an apology, it will take the conversation a completely different direction. So if let's say that you're curious about the type of person I am, or you're upset with me for some reason. If I start the conversation with, Angelina, I owe you a huge apology. It gets into a different mindset immediately. And you're like, for what? And then, I was late to the podcast. I'm so sorry. Stuff going on. You know what happens. It shifts the entire tone of the conversation. So starting with an apology can almost reset any conditioning.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. So do you think it's because they dropped their guard? And by the way, he was on time this morning, but keep
I
going.
was on time. Yeah, I think it breaks the conditioning. I think you go into a conversation where maybe you're upset and you think, I'm going to tell them this and I'm going to tell them that. And you've got that script in your head and they start with an apology and you're like, wait, what?
It's a curveball, especially if it's genuine.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's
Well,
genuine,
and all these things should be genuine.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it
These
could
should
melt
never
their,
be used as just tactics.
yeah. Well, it could melt their heart if it's genuine.
Yep.
Yeah, they throw their
And the
little
other
script
way,
away.
Angelina? Yeah, right. Exactly.
I was going to go through my whole talking points. I was going to argue.
Yeah, exactly right. And the other way that we can do that is starting with feel free to say no.
Oh,
Angelina, feel free to say no to this, but does it make sense to try this? And what that does is that gives our mind a back door right away. Oh, the pressure's gone. I don't have to make a decision now. He's okay if I say no. It gets you into a different mindset. I did this with a gentleman on an airline one time. My family and I were sitting together, and one of my daughters was not sitting with us, and it was an exit row in an airplane. So this gentleman was sitting in the seat, and honestly, there was not a prayer in getting him out of the seat. So I went over and I said, feel free to say no, but my daughter's in another spot in the plane. We'd love to sit together. And as soon as I said, feel free to say no, he said to me, no, go ahead. What do you have? And it was a completely different conversation. And he gave up his exit row seat to sit in the middle in like row 4 of the airplane. So it's a powerful tool that again breaks the conditioning.
I wonder if it's because it provides freedom, permission to the other party that you're
It does.
here is the power. I'm giving you the baseball. Here's the power compared to I'm taking the baseball from you.
Yeah,
So you
100%.
owe me the baseball.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you're
By the
dead
way,
on.
yeah. By the way, I normally record on Riverside, but I have another laptop arriving tomorrow because this one is on its way out regarding the some of the ability to regarding the 8 RAM. So if it goes over, just log back in. If it
Okay,
okay, just wanted to
sure,
cover that. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah,
So one of the things you also mentioned is there's two words. Yes, the give and take, but you also talked about the cause and effect. Do you want to speak
yeah.
at all about that for a moment?
Yeah, so we could talk about one of the words, and if you want to delve into a couple of others, we can. But the big word is because.
Okay.
And they did a huge study on this, which was fascinating. They sent a social psychologist, an intern, into a public library in New York City, and they told the intern, I want you to butt in line at a photocopier. As you may guess, New Yorkers aren't super receptive to people butting in line. So the intern would just ask, and almost universally it was fail. Nobody would let him in. So they changed your script and they said, may I jump in line because I'm double parked, because I'm late to work, because my wife's expecting me. And they found it was a 60% compliance rate. Now, honestly, Angelina, that's not fascinating at all because you're giving a good reason, you're applying to the human side. But here's where it gets cool. So then they changed the script one more time. And they said, all I want you to say is, may I jump in line to make a copy because I need to make a copy. So it was a clear redundancy and a nonsense reason. What they found was it was almost an identical compliance rate at almost 60%. So this cause and effect, this I need to because of, really gets to our reptilian brain, right? Because when we're growing up as kids, why is the sky blue? Why don't fish drown when they're in water? Why?
You better
So
give me
we're
a
always,
reason.
right, exactly. So we're always looking for that A, so B. And because triggers that in our brains now. So one thing I always teach my clients is if you're trying to convince somebody of something or you want something, tie in the word because and give your rationale, and it's going to increase your chance of compliance by up to 60%. And who doesn't want that?
So let me put you on the spot for a moment. People should design a legacy because,
Because it gives you a purpose. You
oh,
know, a lot of times we go through life without purpose. We just set temporary goals. But when you set up a legacy, when you think about what you want to be known for and how you want to be remembered, it gives you a purpose. So on that day, Angelina, when I'm feeling lousy and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? If I look at my legacy and go, man, because I want to be remembered as a good dad, because I want to be remembered as an incredible husband, because I want to be the person who bent communication to his will and taught other people how to do it, that's my legacy.
yes. Can I read what you shared with me?
Sure.
Yes, you wrote, I strive to leave a legacy as a beacon of connection and empowerment. In my family, I am a pillar of love and support. In the world, I am a champion for active listening and giving back. My voice empowers others, both through clear communication and the tools I provide as a coach and public speaker. I aim to be a name synonymous with unforgettable impact, shifting lives and businesses for the better. So, my question for you after reading that is, if legacy had a personal definition for you, what would that personal definition be?
Uh, wow, that's a great question. I think my personal definition would be after I am gone, when that gravestone is set, what do people write about me, say about me? I think legacy is what's said about you when you're not in the room or you can't hear what's being said. That to me is the definition of legacy.
Very cool. Very cool. If you were to set aside a weekend or two as we wrap to design a hardcover coffee table book, a legacy hardcover coffee table book to share and to pass on, what might be in its pages?
I would say, and oddly enough, I am writing a book. It's not a legacy, but it's about this. I would say Jake was always in search of the perfect conversation. I
Oh,
would say between the covers would be my constant striving to what makes any given conversation truly beneficial, clear, lacking miscommunication between me and other people. What are the fundamentals? What's the foundation of that? And I would say between the covers would be my lifelong search for what that secret is to being the perfect communicator.
oh, that's beautiful. What do you think are the top 3 or 4 values that influence and drive you today?
One is family. That means more to me than anything. I've got an amazing wife. I've got 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy, and a granddaughter. And there is nothing I wouldn't do for them. So family is one. Drive is two. Money doesn't motivate me, but the drive to be better than yesterday and the best at what I do does. And I think the third thing for me is probably health. You know, I'm not getting any younger and I don't want to live longer. I just want to figure out how I can maximize length of life with health so that at the end, I'm still able to enjoy everything that I built.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Um, I'm going to ask you to sign back on because the timer is going to go in a moment.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yep.
I just want to just thank you for being a guest today on the Design Your Legacy podcast. I think some of the valuable insights that you brought up had to do with again the principles that make a conversation meaningful, but also the awareness around one's conditioning. You know, what motivates one uh, to be better and to you looked at the problem in the landscape and said to yourself, what is it that I can give back to society, to the next generations to make it easier? But also, I think you understand that we all have a need to be heard, whether it's telling stories by drawings on cave walls or just that 210 rule. So as we come to a close, what is the best website for somebody to reach you?
You can go to jakestallconsulting.com and my last name is Stahl. So it's jakestallconsulting.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn and there's 100 Jake Stalls on LinkedIn, but I'm the only one that identifies as a fractional chief learning officer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jake, for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Angelina.